One thing that's really struck me, Justine, is that there's a pattern to these things across so many areas, and you've written about quite a number of them. And one part of the pattern, which needs to be sort of maybe highlighted as well, though, is that the response of organisations where whistleblowers start to try to raise issues is almost never to see those people as a resource. You know, you would think in a healthy organisation, the fact that people are raising questions should be completely normal and should be regarded as both a safety valve in terms of the extraordinary issues around child abuse, for example, but even in financial terms, you would think that actually a functioning financial institution would want to hear from people who could say, hold on, you've got a problem here. And that's one part of it. The other part of it is, if you look at, for example, the Michael Neary case, it does seem to me to be really interesting that some of the primary whistleblowers in that case still remain anonymous, still don't feel that it is possible for them to identify themselves, because even though all the allegations they made have subsequently been shown to be absolutely true, there's still almost a sense of shame that clings to the fact of being the rat. And is there something about our informer culture, you know, the sort of idea that being an informer is a terrible thing, that still clings to some kind of ridiculously outmoded attitude about people telling the truth?
Yeah, I think it is in our history, it's in our culture. And it's the old mentality, shoot the messenger, you know, which as journalists we would encounter in a much milder, more moderate way. People don't want to know. They don't want their lives upset. And in the swimming world, we saw that happen again and again, where people turned away and said, I don't want to know about this. I'm going to be president next year. I hope this all stays under the carpet until my term is over. And there are people still there who are in denial. You know, there's the natural human instinct as well that something so awful as this couldn't be true. You know, there's an inability to believe, but there's also a determination not to believe. And it takes an awful long time, as you say, for the organisations to actually use these people as a resource. I'm glad to say that Karen is being used by Swim Ireland, and they have invited her to talk to them and to, you know, make proposals about improvements that can be made. But it takes an awful long time, and I do believe that if there was legislation there, and that if whistleblowers were respected by society and by our laws, it would speed the acceptance, the route to acceptance up very quickly.
Tom Clonan, whom I'm sure you know as well, security correspondent of the Irish Times, but also author of a really seminal piece of work on bullying and sexual harassment within the Defence Forces, having been a serving officer himself. Tom, I want to talk to you about your own particular experiences in a minute, but one broad point that seems to me to be perhaps important is, you know, we should recognise that there would be some scepticism out there about protecting whistleblowers, which would be that people would say, look, this is a cranked charter. And it is true, of course, that people sometimes raise issues for reasons which are not benign and which are not well motivated. That sometimes even people who are telling you the truth may be telling you the truth for quite mean, nasty reasons that they want to get at somebody or whatever else. In that context, how would you yourself see the idea of affording protection to whistleblowers in such a way that it doesn't become just a charter for every crank with a grudge?
Well, I suppose when I look back at what has happened, my experience over the last 10 years, it's only when I meet people like Eugene, and I had the privilege of meeting Bernadette earlier today, that our experiences have so much in common. And when I met John Devitt of Transparency International, he used a phrase in our conversation, whistleblower reprisal. 2 words I'd never heard before. And all of a sudden it made sense to me that that was our common experience, and certainly mine for the last 10 years. It's 10 years since my research was published. And 10 years on, I still feel the effects of whistleblower reprisal. And for me, supporting Transparency International and this call for whistleblower legislation, if it prevents somebody else from having to undergo this this purgatory in a sense, and if it empowers people and enables them to tell the truth, well, the benefits to society far outweigh the risk posed by people who will reveal information, who might have an agenda. And when we think back to what we now know about clerical child sex abuse, the abuse within the sporting organisations, and in my case, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, bullying within the defence forces, there's a huge benefit for society. And a lot of our problems, as Vincent said at the outset, arise from, activities or behaviours that went unchallenged in an atmosphere where a frank and open exchange of views are not welcome. So I think part of the intellectual dimension of Irish life, we need to have a much stronger intellectual tradition here, where people can actually voice opinions, express their views, and to have them heard in a safe environment. Because the damage that I've experienced, that Eugene has experienced, that Bernadette has experienced, it's damaging on a psychological level, on a personal level, and on a professional level. And we did nothing wrong. We did the right thing. So I think that phrase, whistleblower reprisal, I found that very, very important. Just to have the language to describe what has happened, I think is a very, very healthy thing. So I would be very, very strong supporter and advocate of this whistleblower legislation, and I would be very, very, very suspicious of those who would seek to prevent its universal application. I really would have very, very serious misgivings about anybody in public life who would express the view that whistleblower legislation, the protection of whistleblowers, is a bad thing.
Can I just ask you, in your case, your whistleblowing arose out of a piece of academic research, effectively. I mean, you were doing a structured piece of research into the experiences of serving members of the Defence Forces in relation to harassment. Did you set out to be a whistleblower, or was it an accidental result of where your research led you? No.
Again, I'm still trying to make sense of everything that's happened, as I'm sure Eugene is, and Bernadette, and other people in the room here. I was an army officer for 11 years. And the day that I swore my solemn oath of allegiance to the Constitution was one of the proudest days of my life when I was commissioned as an officer. I served overseas in the Middle East, in the former Yugoslavia, and for the final 2 years of my military service, when I was promoted captain, I was transferred into the Chief of Staff's branch. So I was working as a staff officer for the Chief of Staff. So I'm just trying to put my own military service in context. I was, if you like, my career trajectory, if you want to use that awful military pun, I wasn't somebody with an axe to grind. I wasn't somebody who had been, in some way, I wasn't a disgruntled employee. I was going all the way, as it were. And when I began my research, I wanted to look at, the experiences of female members of the Defence Forces. There are a number of reasons for that. My grandmother was a very active member of Cumann na mBan, and she told me about her, her contribution to the liberation of the state. And I think that the role that women played in the liberation of the state in the War of Independence and in the Civil War has been grossly underplayed and underreported, and they've been written out of the historical context. So that was one of the reasons why I was interested. I also have 3 sisters, so I was very conscious of the dislocation between the use of force and women. That's not true. Direct experience. So I began the research, and one of the methods that I used was interviewing women, and I had a look at all of the documents. But I suppose, as a male officer in a male-dominated organisation, I had not been bullied. I had not been sexually harassed, so therefore I presumed it did not exist. But when I began to interview my female colleagues, it became apparent. I mean, out of 60 women that I interviewed, 59 reported some form of bullying, harassment, sexual harassment.